And here we are for our final installment of the three branches of government. And today our focus is going to be on the judicial branch, as you can see it circled there. So there's our little constitutional bonsai tree, and the judicial branch is going to be our focus. Remember that the three branches are equally powerful. There is not one branch that has more power than any of the others, and each branch also checks on the other branches to help maintain that balance of power. So the judicial branch is sometimes a little hard to see, like what is it that they actually do? Because there's not very much that they actually do, but because of that, the little that they do the little that they do is actually hugely powerful because it's like the one thing that they do. So let's take a look at the judicial branch. So again, our main focus here is that judicial branch disappear. We're focusing mostly on the Supreme Court today. However, I do want to make mention that the judicial branch also includes other lower federal courts. So there's more than just the Supreme Court. There's other federal courts all throughout the country. And so technically they are part of the judicial branch also. But our focus today is going to be on the Supreme Court, that third branch of the Constitution in the judicial branch. Okay. So here they are. This is the Supreme Court. They are considered the highest court in the land. And what that means is that when the Supreme Court makes a decision, then all of the other lower courts and all of the everybody's have to follow that decision. That's what makes them supreme, right? So there are 9 justices on the Supreme Court. We have 9 of them. And the Constitution actually doesn't specify how many justices we need to have. Throughout our history, we've had different numbers of justices serving on the Supreme Court. So you might be wondering, what's a justice? It's just a fancier way of saying judge. They are judges. They are people who listen to cases and then make decisions. But because there's 9 of them, right, the majority wins. So after listening to a court case, the 9 of them each make their own individual decision, and then whichever side has the most leaning in that direction ends up being the ruling of the court. So you could have 4 justices think, one thing, and 5 justices think the other. Well, then it's going to be the other because 5 justices say it's going to be that way. So we've had many Supreme Court decisions throughout our history that have been unanimous, like all the justices agree that this is what needs to be said. And we've had other things that have changed the history of our country and the course of our nation over almost a tie, right? With just one little tie-breaking, not a vote, but a tie-breaking decision. Because justices don't vote on their ruling, they make rulings, they make decisions, and they have to back up their decisions with the evidence that they heard. But that the same people who hear different people who hear the same evidence might have a different interpretation of that. And so it's up to the judicial branch to interpret the laws. So in order to become a Supreme Court justice, you are not elected. It is not an elected position. The people do not choose our justices. Instead, the president gets to choose them. But the president only gets to choose a Supreme Court justice if there is a seat that needs to be filled. And once you are chosen, you get to be a Supreme Court justice for life. There is no term limit. There's no 2-year term or 4-year term or 6-year term. Once you are a justice, you are there until you die. Now, if you choose to you may also retire. So you can stop being a justice before you die if you want to. But once you've been chosen as a justice, you are there forever, unless you retire or die. And so if a Supreme Court justice retires or dies, then the president gets to pick their replacement. So the president gets to go on a nationwide search to choose who is the next Supreme Court justice going to be. Wouldn't it be cool if they made like a game show out of it? Like, who wants to be a Supreme Court justice? And there would be all these competitions and we get to eliminate people. Oh, that would be the dream, right? Maybe not. Instead, we get to find these highly qualified people to make these very important decisions for our country, and the president gets to choose them. Now, remember, the president chooses the person, but then they have to go through a process of being approved or confirmed by both the House of Representatives and the Senate. So Congress has to approve of the person that the president chooses. So here's another example of where the different branches of government need to work together and agree on something in order to make things happen. So there's your Supreme Court justices as they are today. This is our current Supreme Court. And their main job, like I said, is to interpret the laws. The way it works is if a court case makes its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, then they get to listen to that case. And then whatever they decide is what goes. So the rest of the country and all of the states have to obey what the Supreme Court says. So it's their job to tell us, what do these laws mean? And if a case makes it all the way up to the Supreme Court, then they're the ones that say, well, this is how that law applies to us. This is what that law means. And what the Supreme Court decides stays. So as you can see, it's a pretty powerful one thing that they do. They don't have a list of jobs that they do like the president or the legislative branch do. Instead, they do one thing. And the one thing they do is they decide what our laws mean. And whatever they say goes. Now, another piece of that is they can also determine if laws are constitutional. So our Supreme Court decides, does this law break our Constitution? Does it need to go because it goes against what our Constitution says? Or does this fit? Is it constitutional? And it's up to our judicial branch to kind of figure that out. In some ways, the judicial branch is sort of like the watchdog of the government. They're making sure that other parts of the government are following the Constitution, right? Now, I did say that the Supreme Court justices are there for life, right? However, they can be impeached in the same way that the president can be impeached. But remember, to impeach someone is just to accuse them of a wrongdoing. They would then need to go through the process to be removed from office. And I would have to check my records on this, but I'm not sure if there ever has been a Supreme Court justice who's been removed from office. They've retired, they've died, but I don't think we've ever impeached and removed one. So I'd have to look back into that again just to double check. So here's where the Supreme Court gets their power. It's in the Constitution. We call it the Supremacy Clause. And up there in white and yellow, these are the actual words of the Constitution when talking about the Supreme Court. And it says, this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary, notwithstanding. So I tried to highlight in yellow like the most important pieces of that so they'll stand out. But there in green, this is what that means. What our Constitution means is every state must follow all the laws that the United States government makes. And every judge has to obey the Supreme Court's rulings. To put it even simpler, every state and every judge has to follow the laws of the United States government, even if they don't agree. Okay? That is power. That is supremacy. So whatever the Supreme Court decides, every state, every courtroom across the country has to follow what the Supreme Court has determined, right? That's a big deal. And it's like the one thing they do, right? The one thing they do is make decisions that affect all of us, right? They are the ones that decide what the laws really actually mean. So they don't do much, right? They just make decisions. They sit in their courtroom making decisions, but those decisions affect us, and they have a lot of weight and power behind that. So let's take a look at those checks and balances. What does the judicial branch do to the other branches? How does the judicial branch check on them? Again, they only do one thing, right? When they're checking on the executive branch, they can declare executive actions unconstitutional. In other words, if the president does something wrong, then the judicial branch says, you can't do that. You did something wrong, right? If the legislative branch does something wrong, right? If they pass a law that breaks the Constitution, then again, the judicial branch says, you can't do that. That's unconstitutional. Now, here's the tricky thing. That's all they can do, right? The judicial branch can't do anything to the president. All they can do is say, he did something wrong. We saw him. He did something wrong. I'm telling, right? And that's all they can do. From there, the legislative branch would then impeach and then perhaps remove a president from office. So the judicial branch, like I said, they're the watchdog of the government, right? They're watching to make sure everyone else is doing what they should do, but they don't necessarily take it to the next level, right? They themselves can't punish the president, or the judicial branch can't punish the legislative branch, but the judicial branch can say, you're doing something, we're telling everyone, and then it's up to we, the people, to follow through and do our own punishing of our government if we need to, right? So again, lots and lots of power that the judicial branch has, because they only do basically one thing: make decisions, right? And so that kind of wraps us up with our three branches of government.